Okay, so this lesson is going to be a tutorial over the Unit 1 product assessment. Let's look at number 1, Part A. I do not have the actual question on this video, but I will remind you that we had a couple teachers in their classes were raising money, and it tells us in number 1 that Mrs. Vasquez's class has already raised 40% of their $300 goal. So all you were asked to do, or what you were asked to do, is to create a model, a fraction, and a decimal of the 40%. Let's start with the fraction. With the fraction, 40% means 40 out of 100. So we could start with the fraction of 40 out of 100. However, we would want to simplify that. Now, both these numbers are divisible by 10. So if you divide 40 by 10, we would get 4. And 100 by 10, we would get 10. So we have 4/10. Now we could actually go ahead and use 4/10 and model 4/10. But I'm going to simplify it a little bit more. And 4 and 10 have a common factor of 2. And what we end up with is a fraction of 2/5. And that's the model I'm going to go ahead and create. So we have a model with 5 sections, and of course if we were talking about 40%, it would be 2 of the 5 sections. So that is a model for 40%. Now the decimal, if you look at one of these fractions, you may already see the decimal. If you say this fraction 4/10, you're actually saying the decimal of 4/10, 0.4. If you weren't aware of that, we could remember that we can divide our fractions, and we divide the numerator by the denominator. And when we work that out, obviously 5 is not going to 2, but we can add a decimal and a 0, and 5 goes into 20 exactly 4 times. So 5 times, so again, our decimal is 0.4. Okay, let's move on to Mrs. May's class. Now this one was a little bit different. What it stated in number 1 was that Mrs. May's class already has 30%, or it says $150 of their goal. But it doesn't tell us exactly what their goal is. So what we have to do, again, with this one is to create a model of fraction and a decimal for 30%. So we're trying to model 30%. Let's again start with the fraction. The fraction is 30 out of 100 because it is a percent. We can simplify that to a fraction of 3/10. And that's a simplified fraction. That's completely simplified. So we have to actually create a model of 3/10. And we could use a strip diagram. And we would need 10 sections. I know my model is sections aren't perfect, but we would shade 3 of the 10 sections, and that's a model of 3/10. And again, if you just say that fraction 3/10, you are pronouncing the decimal 3/10, 0.3 with the 3 in the tenths place. If you did not recognize the place value, we could again divide our fraction. 10 divided into 3 doesn't go. We add a decimal and a 0, and 10 goes into 30 3 times, and we have no remainder, so 0.3. Okay, let's take a look at Part B. This was a very difficult part for many of us. This one wants us to determine how much more each class needs to earn. Okay, so let's think back to Mrs. Vasquez's class. And if I think about the model, it's a model of 2/5. Well, it says in Mrs. Vasquez's class, the entire model would represent their goal, and their goal was $300. Well, if we're using 40% or 2/5, we need to understand what each one of these sections is worth. Well, there's 5 sections, so what we're going to do is we would divide 300 by 5. And when you divide 300 by 5, you're going to get 60. Each section is worth $60. That is one way to look at it by using that model. And of course, the class had already raised 2/5, which is 40%. So what was remaining was the 3/5. And you'll notice that we have 3 of the 5 sections. If there's 60, if each section is worth 60, we could just multiply 60 times 3 and you'll get 180. That's one way of just using the model. We could understand that if the class already had the 40% here, then what remained was 60%. So we're trying to find 60% of the $300. So we could just use multiplication, 0.6 times 300, and you will get 180. If you knew that the class had already earned $120, you could have subtracted the 40% portion of $120 from 300, and you would have also gotten 180. All right. The other part of Part B was Mrs. May's class. This one was a little tricky because it said 30% or $150 of their goal. So I'm going to go ahead and use the model again to try to explain this one. 30%, we're talking about 3/10, so we need 10 sections. And what we understand in this model is that 3/10 is $150. Well, if you know 3/10 is 150, then we can figure out what each one of these sections is worth if they total 150. You're just simply dividing 150 by 3, and we realize that each section is worth $50 in this model. Well, if we're trying to determine how much more, then we are trying to determine this amount, and that would be 7/10, which is remaining, or 70%, and each one of them is worth 50, so we could just multiply 50 times 7, and that is going to equal $350. So we realize that it turns out that the entire goal was going to be $500, and you could have subtracted 500 minus 150, and you would have also gotten 350. Okay, for this video, we're going to stop there. That answers question number 1. There will be an additional video for question number 2.